The streetlight flickered as red and blue washed over the quiet neighborhood, slicing through the dark like a warning no one had asked for. A black sedan sat at the curb, engine still warm, its door half open. Beside it stood a black man in a tailored coat, hands calmly at his sides, breath visible in the cold night air. The police officer's voice was sharp, impatient. "Step away from the vehicle." The man didn't raise his voice. He didn't run. He only frowned, confused, almost wounded, as if reality itself had just accused him of a crime he didn't understand. Before we go any further, pause with me for a moment. Stories like this don't belong to just one street or one city. Where are you watching from right now? Drop your place below. Sometimes it helps to remember how far a single human story can reach. The man's name was Michael Harris, and moments earlier, his biggest concern had been the late hour. He'd just finished a long day, one that started before sunrise and ended with a stack of case files heavier than his briefcase. His shoulders ached, not from fear, but from responsibility. Michael had spent decades carrying the quiet weight of decisions that shaped lives, yet tonight, standing under that streetlight, none of that seemed to matter. The officer circled him slowly, hand resting near his holster, eyes locked on Michael with suspicion sharpened by something unspoken. "Whose car is this?" the officer asked. Michael blinked. "Mine," he replied evenly, reaching into his coat. "Don't move," the officer snapped. Michael froze, his hands stopping midair. The cold seeped deeper now, not from the weather, but from the sudden awareness that one wrong move could rewrite this night forever. Around them, the neighborhood was still. Curtains twitched. A dog barked somewhere far away. No one stepped in. Minutes earlier, Michael had been humming softly to himself, a habit he picked up years ago when stress followed him home. That tune was gone now, replaced by the steady thud of his heartbeat. He thought of his wife, Grace, probably asleep already, her reading lamp still on by the bed. He'd promised he wouldn't be late again. He always made promises like that, small ones, meant to keep life gentle. The officer demanded identification. Michael nodded slowly. "It's in my wallet. Back pocket." The officer hesitated, then gestured. "Slow." Michael moved with care, every motion deliberate, as if he were walking across thin ice. His wallet came out, smooth leather worn at the edges. The officer snatched it, flipping it open under the harsh glow of the patrol car lights. His brow furrowed, not in relief, but confusion. "You live around here?" the officer asked. "Yes," Michael said. "3 houses down." "So why did a neighbor call this in?" Michael swallowed. "You'd have to ask them." There was the quiet sting he knew too well. The assumption. The doubt that clung to him no matter how carefully he spoke or how neatly he dressed. He had faced it in parking garages, in elevators, even once in a courtroom hallway where someone mistook him for a defendant instead of the man presiding over the bench. Another patrol car arrived. Then another. The scene grew heavier, louder. Radios crackled. Questions overlapped. Michael stood still, hands now resting on the roof of his own car, metal cold against his palms. He focused on breathing, on staying calm, on not letting anger slip into his voice. Anger, he knew, was a luxury he couldn't afford. One officer whispered to another, eyes flicking toward Michael like he was an unsolved problem. "He says it's his," one muttered. "Yeah, they always do," came the reply. That sentence cut deeper than any shout. Michael closed his eyes for half a second. He thought of his father, who taught him patience as survival. He thought of the long road it took to earn respect in rooms that weren't built for him. And he wondered, quietly, how many times a person had to prove they belonged before being believed. The officer with the wallet frowned again, scanning the card once more, then looking up at Michael's face. Something shifted. Not understanding yet, but doubt about his own certainty. "What do you do for work, Mr. Harris?" the officer asked, tone still guarded. Michael hesitated. "I'm in public service," he said. The night seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the truth to surface, even as the tension thickened. And just as the officer opened his mouth to speak again, Michael heard footsteps behind him. Someone approaching, someone who would unknowingly tip this fragile balance. And that's where the moment hangs. Footsteps that sounded lighter than the boots already planted around him. A woman emerged from the shadow of the maple tree across the street. She wore slippers and a thick cardigan pulled tight around her shoulders, gray hair pinned back hastily as if she'd rushed out without thinking. Her porch light clicked on behind her, spilling a warm yellow glow onto the pavement. "Officer," she called, voice trembling but firm. "That man didn't steal that car." Every head turned. The officer nearest Michael stiffened. "Ma'am, please step back." She didn't. Instead, she took 2 careful steps forward, clutching something in her hand, a set of keys, shaking slightly. "I live right there," she said, pointing to the house beside Michael's. "I saw him pull in. He waved at me. He always does." Michael looked at her, surprised. He recognized her now, Mrs. Eleanor Brooks. They'd exchanged polite nods for years. Once, during a snowstorm, he'd helped shovel her driveway without a word. He hadn't even known if she remembered his name. The officer hesitated. "Are you saying this vehicle belongs to him?" "Yes," she said quickly. "I've seen him drive it every day. Same car. Same plates." Silence rippled through the scene. Not relief yet, but disruption. The kind that unsettles certainty. Another officer approached Mrs. Brooks. "Ma'am, did you make the call?" Her eyes widened. "No. I would never." She glanced at Michael, then back at the officer. "I know my neighbors." For the first time since the sirens arrived, Michael felt something loosen in his chest. Not safety, just the smallest crack where air could get in. If you were standing there watching this unfold, what would you have done? Would you have spoken up, or stayed behind the curtain? Be honest. Comment your answer below. And if this moment stirred something you can't quite explain, tap like to show that quiet courage still matters. The officer holding Michael's wallet flipped it open again, slower this time. He read the name aloud, then the address. His jaw tightened. "Dispatch, can you run this again?" The radio crackled back confirmation. The plates matched. The car was registered to Michael Harris. Clean record. No flags. A murmur passed between the officers, a subtle recalibration of tone. One of them cleared his throat. "Sir, you can put your hands down." Michael didn't move right away. He waited, just a second longer, until the words felt real. Then he lowered his hands, fingers tingling where the cold metal had pressed into his skin. "I apologize for the inconvenience," the first officer said, though his eyes still avoided Michael's. "We had a report of a suspicious individual." Michael nodded once. "I understand." It wasn't forgiveness. It was restraint. Mrs. Brooks exhaled loudly, as if she'd been holding her breath the entire time. She looked at Michael, eyes soft. "I'm glad you're all right," she said. "Thank you," he replied, and meant more than the words could carry. The officers began to disperse, their movements efficient, practiced, like rewinding a scene that never should have played. One car pulled away, then another. The lights faded. The street returned to its earlier quiet, but something invisible had shifted. Mrs. Brooks lingered. "You know," she said gently, "my late husband used to say, if you don't speak when something's wrong, you become part of it." Michael swallowed. "You spoke. That mattered." She smiled sadly. It shouldn't have taken courage. After she returned to her house, Michael stood alone beside his car. His legs felt weak now that the danger had passed. He leaned against the door, letting the night settle around him. The cold no longer bit. It pressed, reminding him he was still here. He thought the worst was over. He was wrong. The next morning, sunlight poured through the tall windows of the courthouse, illuminating polished floors and marble columns that echoed with footsteps. Michael adjusted his tie, expression composed, as clerks and attorneys passed him without a second glance. Here he belonged, or so it seemed. In chambers, he reviewed briefs with quiet focus, his mind steady, trained to separate emotion from judgment. But fragments of the night before kept slipping through. Hands on the hood, the officer's tone, the way silence felt heavier than accusation. Just before noon, his assistant knocked lightly. "Judge Harris," she said, hesitating. "There's something you should see." She handed him a tablet. On the screen was shaky cell phone footage. Grainy, dimly lit, but unmistakable. Michael.
Officer,
The street.
please, I can explain
The
everything.
patrol
Stop right
cars.
there and keep your hands
The
on. I'm not
voice
resisting.
accusing
Just
him of
listen to me.
stealing
I
his
said
own
stop
car.
moving.
The caption beneath the video read, "Cops catch car thief in suburban neighborhood." Michael stared at the screen, pulse quickening. The comments were already flooding in. Speculation. Certainty without context. His assistant spoke softly. "It's spreading fast." Michael closed his eyes, just for a moment. He'd spent his life believing dignity could shield him. That silence was strength. That if he did everything right, the world would meet him halfway. Outside his office, the courthouse hummed on, unaware that the line between respect and suspicion had just collapsed again. And as the video's view count climbed, Michael realized this wasn't just
Officer,
about a
please,
mistake
I can
on a
explain
quiet
everything.
street.
Stop right there and keep
It was
your hands
about
on. I'm
what
not
happens
resisting.
when the
Just
whole
listen to me.
world
I said
thinks it
stop
knows the
moving.
truth, and no one has asked him to speak yet. Michael sat alone long after his assistant left, the tablet still glowing faintly on his desk like an accusation that refused to dim. He replayed the video once. Then again. Each time, a different detail cut deeper. The way his voice stayed calm while the officers sharpened, the angle of the camera that never showed Mrs. Brooks stepping forward, the comment section already deciding who he was before the truth had a chance to breathe. By the end of the day, the video had crossed 1 million views. At home that evening, Grace noticed it immediately, the silence. Michael moved through the house carefully, as if sound itself might break something fragile inside him.
Please, I can
He set
explain
his
everything.
briefcase
Stop right
down
there.
without
Keep your
its
hands on. I'm not
usual
resisting.
thud,
Just listen
loosened
to me.
his
I said
tie but
stop
didn't
moving.
remove it. He stood at the kitchen counter, hands braced, staring at nothing. "Michael," Grace said softly. He turned and she saw it then, not fear, not anger, but exhaustion layered so deep it looked permanent. She crossed the room and touched his arm. He flinched just slightly before forcing a smile. "It's nothing," he said. Grace didn't push. She never did, not at first. She poured tea, let the kettle scream where words couldn't, and waited until he finally sat. When he did, his shoulders slumped like they'd been holding the sky up all day. "They filmed it," he said quietly. "Last night." Grace froze. "Filmed
Officer,
what?"
Please, I can explain
The
everything.
stop.
Stop right there and keep
He
your
met
hands
her
on. I'm not
eyes.
resisting. Just
"They
listen
think
to
I
me.
stole my
said
own
stop
car."
moving.
The room felt smaller suddenly. Grace's hand tightened around the mug. "Michael, is that what's going around online?" He nodded. She reached for the tablet he'd placed face down on the table and watched in silence. 30 seconds in, she covered her mouth. At the end, she looked up at him, eyes wet. "They don't even know who you are." "That's the point," he replied. "They didn't need to." That night, sleep refused to come. Michael lay awake listening to the house settle, the old creaks and sighs he usually found comforting. Instead, each sound reminded him of how thin the walls were between safety and exposure. His phone buzzed nonstop, texts from colleagues,
Officer, please, I
calls
can
he didn't
explain
answer.
everything. Stop right there and keep
Somewhere
your hands on. I'm
between
not resisting.
midnight and
Just
dawn,
listen to me. I
an
said
email
stop
arrived from the court's communications office, requesting a private conversation. The next morning, the courthouse felt different. Eyes lingered too long. Conversations paused when he passed. Respect hadn't vanished, but it had shifted, cracked, revealing something uncertain underneath. In the elevator, a young law clerk glanced at him, then away, cheeks flushed. "Sir," she said finally, "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry." Michael smiled faintly. "Thank you." Sorry for what? He wondered. For the night? For the years? For the fact that no matter how high he climbed, gravity still remembered him? The meeting came at noon.
Officer, please,
A
I can
long
explain
table,
everything. Stop right
neutral
there and keep your hands
faces,
on. I'm not resisting.
carefully
Just listen
chosen
to me. I
words.
said stop
The
moving.
communications director cleared his throat. "Judge Harris, the video has created public interest." Michael leaned back, hands folded. That's one way to put it. They discussed optics. Statements. Whether silence would inflame or calm the situation. Someone suggested a brief clarification. No mention of race, no criticism of the officers. Neutral. Michael listened, then spoke. "You want me to explain myself?" The pause. "We want to protect the court," someone said. Michael nodded slowly. "By asking me to carry this quietly." No one argued. After the meeting, he walked alone through the hallway that led to the courtroom. He remembered being a boy, sitting in the back row of a small church, listening to his father talk about justice like it was sacred ground. You don't demand respect, his father used to say. You live in a way that leaves no room to deny it. Michael had done that. And still, here he was. Have you ever had someone stand by you when no one else would? When the world felt unfairly heavy? Write, yes, below and share their name. Gratitude has a way of finding its way back home. That afternoon, Michael asked to adjourn early. He drove, not home, but across town, to a neighborhood he hadn't visited in years. The streets were narrower, the houses closer together. He parked near a small brick building with peeling paint and a hand-painted sign, Harris Community Legal Aid. Inside, the smell of old paper and coffee wrapped around him like memory. A woman behind the desk looked up, then broke into a smile. "Michael Harris," she said. "Still walking like you're late for something?" "Some habits don't leave," he replied. They talked about the video, about the comments, about how quickly stories get away from the people living them. She listened without interrupting, the way she always had when he was a young attorney volunteering nights and weekends, trying to make sense of a system that felt too big to fix. "You know," she said finally, "this isn't just happening to you. It's happening because of you." Michael frowned. "What do you mean?" "You're visible," she said gently. "And visibility scares people. But it also wakes others up." On his way out, a young man stopped him near the door. "Judge Harris," he said, voice nervous. "My mom sent me that video. She told me you helped our family years ago. I didn't even know your name until today." Michael's throat tightened. "I'm glad she remembers." "She does," the young man said. "She never forgot." Driving home, Michael felt something shift, not relief, but resolve. Maybe silence wasn't strength anymore. Maybe dignity didn't always mean enduring quietly. That evening his phone rang. A known number. "Judge Harris," a voice said. "This is Captain Reynolds from the department. We need to talk." Michael stared out the window at the darkening sky. He knew this conversation wouldn't be simple. Apologies rarely were. And truth, when it finally surfaced, had a way of unsettling everyone it touched. He took a breath. "I'm listening." And as the call continued, as words stacked carefully atop one another, Michael sensed that the story was moving toward something larger than him. Something that would force a reckoning no one had planned for. The meeting was scheduled for Friday morning, in a conference room that smelled faintly of disinfectant and old coffee. Michael arrived early as he always did. Habit. Control. Preparation. He sat alone at the long table, hands folded, eyes on the blank wall ahead of him. The room felt colder than it should have, or maybe that was just the weight of what was coming. The door opened. Captain Reynolds entered first, followed by two officers, one of them painfully familiar. The officer from that night. Michael recognized him immediately, the set of his jaw, the way his eyes scanned before settling, the tension he carried like armor. The officer stopped short when he saw Michael's face more clearly this time. Recognition flickered. Then discomfort. "Judge Harris," Captain Reynolds said, extending a hand. "Thank you for coming." Michael stood, shook it once. "I didn't come as a judge," he said calmly. "I came as a citizen." That landed harder than Michael expected. The captain hesitated, then nodded. "Understood." They sat. Captain Reynolds spoke first, measured and practiced. He acknowledged the video, the public reaction, the department's concern. Words like miscommunication and protocol were carefully placed, like stepping stones across dangerous water. Then the officer cleared his throat. "Sir," he began, eyes fixed on the table, "I want to say, I'm sorry." The word hung there. Apology. Fragile. Incomplete. Michael waited. "I responded to a call," the officer continued. "Suspicious activity. I followed procedure." Michael leaned forward slightly. "Do you believe I was suspicious?" The officer's silence answered first. Then quietly, "I believed the call." Michael nodded. "And when I told you the car was mine?" Another pause. "I didn't believe you." The honesty stung more than denial would have. Michael felt it settle in his chest, heavy but clear. "Why?" Michael asked, voice steady. The officer swallowed. Because I made an assumption. Captain Reynolds shifted in his chair. That's why we're here, he interjected. We take this seriously. Michael looked at the captain, then back at the officer. Assumptions have consequences, he said. That night I stood still because I knew what moving could cost me. Do you understand that? The officer's eyes finally lifted. They were glassy. Yes, sir. Outside the room, the city moved on. Inside, time slowed to the pace of truth. They discussed next steps. Internal review. Public statement. The department would issue a clarification. The officer would undergo retraining. There would be no suspension, at least not yet. Michael listened. Then he spoke again. You're focused on repair, he said. I'm focused on prevention. Captain Reynolds nodded. What are you suggesting? Michael thought of the young man at the Legal Aid Center. Of Mrs. Brooks stepping into the cold. Of Grace watching that video in silence. Let me speak, he said. Not as a judge. As a man who lived this. The room went still. You want a public address? The captain asked. I want a conversation, Michael replied. With your officers. With the community. Not behind a podium, but face to face. The captain considered this. Slowly he nodded. We can arrange that. When the meeting ended, Michael stepped outside into the daylight. The sun felt warmer than it had in days. He didn't feel victorious. He felt exposed. But exposure, he was learning, wasn't always weakness. That evening, the department released a statement. Neutral. It corrected the false narrative but didn't explain the harm. The comments section erupted anyway. Some apologetic, some defiant, many still cruel. Michael read none of it. Instead, he sat at the dining table with Grace, papers spread out between them. Notes. Ideas. Names of community leaders. This wasn't something he could do alone. Are you sure? Grace asked softly. Once you step into this, it won't let go. Michael reached for her hand. It already hasn't. Now I want to pause here, not for the story but for you. Think about the last small good thing you did for someone else, even if no one noticed. Share it below. Your moment might remind someone that humanity hasn't disappeared, it's just quieter than the noise. The first forum was held in a high school gym. Folding chairs. Fluorescent lights. A banner that read Community Listening Night. Michael stood off to the side as people filed in. Officers in uniform, residents with crossed arms, teenagers leaning against walls pretending not to care. When Michael stepped forward, the room hushed, not out of respect, but curiosity. He didn't start with the video. He started with his father. With a story about walking home from school and being stopped for the first time. About learning how to speak slowly. How to keep your hands visible. How to survive being misunderstood. I've worn many titles in my life, Michael said. But that night, none of them mattered. A murmur moved through the crowd. He spoke plainly. About fear. About restraint. About the cost of always being composed so others feel safe. Officers shifted in their seats. Some looked away. Others leaned in. Then a young woman stood. I was afraid to come, she said. But hearing you, I feel less alone. Another voice followed. Then another. The conversation stretched late into the evening. It wasn't neat. It wasn't resolved. But it was real. Afterward, the officer from that night approached Michael. No uniform now. Just a man. Thank you, he said quietly. For not turning away. Michael nodded. This isn't over, he replied. But it started. Driving home, exhaustion settled into Michael's bones. Yet beneath it was something unfamiliar, lightness. Purpose reshaped by pain. At home, Grace hugged him longer than usual. You did good, she whispered. Michael looked out the window at the quiet street, at the place where it had all begun. He knew there would be backlash. Resistance. More nights like that one. But he also knew this. The story was no longer just about what was taken from him, but about what could still be given back. The backlash came faster than the healing. By Monday morning, opinion pieces filled local news feeds. Some praised Michael's restraint. Others questioned his motives. A few accused him of playing the race card, of using his position to shame the department. The internet, relentless and impersonal, flattened nuance into sides. Michael felt it most in the quiet moments, when the house was empty, when the phone stopped ringing, when he caught his reflection in a darkened window and didn't immediately recognize the man looking back. At the courthouse, an envelope waited on his desk. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded once. "You should have stayed quiet." Nothing else. Michael sat down slowly. He didn't show it to anyone. He placed it in a drawer, beneath case files and legal pads, as if burying it might rob it of power. But the words lingered. That afternoon, he received a call from Mrs. Brooks. "I hope I'm not bothering you," she said, voice tentative. "Not at all," Michael replied, surprised and glad to hear her. "I've been watching the news," she continued, "and I just wanted you to know. I'm proud of you." Michael closed his eyes. The knot in his chest loosened, just a fraction. "Thank you," he said. "That means more than you know." After they hung up, he sat there for a long time, thinking about how courage often came from the least expected places. A woman in slippers. A stranger in a gym. A quiet voice choosing to speak. That evening, another forum was held, this one smaller, more intimate. A circle of chairs in a community center room. Officers and residents sat shoulder to shoulder, no podium between them. The conversations cut deeper here. Anger surfaced. So did shame. One officer spoke about fear. A mother spoke about loss. A teenager spoke about being watched every time he walked home. Michael listened more than he spoke. If that revelation hit you in the chest the way it did here, leave a red heart below. Sometimes a single symbol carries what words can't. Near the end, the officer from that night stood again. His voice was unsteady. "I want to say something," he began. "Not as an officer, but as a person." The room stilled. "I thought following procedure meant I was doing the right thing," he said. "But I didn't see the man in front of me. I saw a threat that wasn't there." He turned to Michael. "I can't undo that night, but I'm trying to unlearn what led me to it." Michael met his gaze. He didn't nod. He didn't smile. He simply stayed present. Forgiveness, he knew, was not a performance. Later, alone in his car, Michael let his head rest against the steering wheel. The weight of the weeks pressed down on him, heavy, unrelenting. He thought of the envelope in his drawer, of the comments he never read, of the version of himself that might have chosen silence and safety instead. Grace called as he drove home. "You sound tired," she said. "I am," he admitted. "Do you regret it?" He considered the question carefully. "No," he said, "but I'm scared." "That's allowed," she replied gently. That night, Michael dreamed of the streetlight. The red and blue flashes blurred together, then faded. In their place stood faces, some angry, some hopeful, all watching him. He woke before dawn, heart racing, the dream clinging to him like fog. By morning, a decision had formed. He requested a meeting with the state's judicial council. It wasn't required. In fact, it was discouraged. But Michael knew something had shifted. His role, his silence, his distance, it all felt misaligned now. At the meeting, he spoke plainly. About the night. About the forums. About the letters, both supportive and threatening. About the thin line between authority and humanity. "I am not asking for special treatment," he said. "I am asking for awareness. For accountability. For space to tell the truth without punishment." The room was quiet. Some faces were sympathetic, others unreadable. When it ended, no resolution was offered. Only a promise to review concerns. Outside, rain had begun to fall. Michael stood under the overhang, watching drops scatter across the pavement. For a moment he felt very small. One man against systems that moved slowly, reluctantly. Be honest with yourself for a second. Could you forgive after something like this? Type forgive if you think you could, or never if the wound would run too deep. As Michael stepped into the rain, coat pulled tight, he understood that forgiveness wasn't a finish line. It was a road, uneven, personal, and often lonely. And he was still at the beginning. The rain followed him for days. It streaked across courthouse windows, darkened sidewalks, softened the city into shades of gray. Michael felt it in his bones, an ache that came from standing in the open too long. The story hadn't moved on, not really. It had just learned to whisper instead of shout. Then, on Thursday morning, his phone rang before sunrise. Judge Harris, his assistant said, voice tight. There's been a development. Michael sat up, instantly awake. What kind? The department released the body cam footage. He closed his eyes. He had known this was coming. The footage would either confirm the truth or complicate it beyond repair. By noon, the video was everywhere. This time, there was no shaky angle. No missing context. The footage showed Michael exactly as he remembered, still, compliant, controlled. It showed the officer's tone, the repeated commands, the moment when Mrs. Brooks stepped into frame, her voice cutting through the tension like light through fog. Public reaction shifted. Slowly. Unevenly. But it shifted. Headlines changed. Commentators corrected themselves. Some apologized. Others doubled down. But something important happened. People began to see what had been invisible before. Michael watched none of it. Instead, he sat in chambers with a stack of letters. Real ones. Handwritten. A teacher from Ohio. A truck driver from Texas. A single mother who wrote, I showed this to my son so he knows he's not crazy. Michael pressed his fingers to the paper, grounding himself. That evening, he was invited, unexpectedly, to speak at a police academy. Recruits. First week. Fresh faces. Clean uniforms. He stood at the front of the room, not elevated, not separated. Just a man with a story. I don't want you to fear this job, he said. And I don't want you to fear people like me. The room was silent. Fear narrows your vision, he continued. And when your vision narrows, you stop seeing people. A recruit raised his hand. Sir, how did you stay calm? Michael paused. I didn't feel calm, he said honestly. I felt trained. The word landed heavy. Afterward, one recruit approached him, eyes bright. My dad went through something like that, he said. Thank you for saying it out loud. Driving home, Michael felt something unfamiliar stir, hope, cautious and fragile. Not the loud kind. The kind that grows roots quietly. If you still believe love and understanding can win, even after pain, comment below. Let hope show itself, even if it feels small. That weekend, Michael returned to the street. The same curb. The same streetlight. Different feeling. Mrs. Brooks joined him, leaning on her cane. Looks peaceful now, she said. It does, Michael replied. A few neighbors waved. One stopped to apologize for not coming out that night. Another simply nodded, eyes downcast. Michael didn't hold any of it against them. Fear made people small. He knew that now more than ever. On Sunday evening, Michael and Grace sat on the porch, watching the sky soften into dusk. Grace rested her head on his shoulder. You've changed, she said. So have you, he replied. She smiled faintly. I've always been this way. You just had to catch up. They laughed quietly. The sound felt earned. On Monday, a letter arrived from the department. The officer from that night had requested a transfer to community outreach. Voluntary. No press release. Just a line at the bottom of the page. Michael read it twice. He didn't know how to feel. Change, he was learning, rarely came with certainty. That afternoon, he received another envelope. This one with a return address. Inside was a child's drawing. A stick figure standing beside a car, a speech bubble above it that read, "This is my dad. He didn't do anything wrong." Michael's eyes burned. That night, as he placed the drawing on his desk, he understood something with sudden clarity. The story was no longer his to carry alone. It had become a mirror, one that asked everyone who looked into it to decide who they wanted to be. And as the city settled into sleep, Michael felt the slow approach of something he hadn't expected so soon. Not closure, but purpose, reshaped by pain and lit gently by hope. The invitation arrived quietly, without ceremony. A cream-colored envelope. Heavy paper. Official seal. Michael recognized it immediately, the State Bar Association. Annual Judicial Conference. Normally, his attendance would have been routine, expected, almost invisible. This time, there was a handwritten note tucked inside. "We would like you to close the conference." Michael sat back in his chair, the weight of it settling slowly. Closing meant speaking last. Speaking truthfully. Speaking to people who understood power, but not always its cost. He didn't answer right away. That night he walked again. Not for distance, just movement. The city breathed around him. Buses sighing at stops, laughter spilling from open restaurant doors, the ordinary life that kept going even when stories like his tried to interrupt it. He passed a mural he hadn't noticed before. Fresh paint. A pair of hands reaching toward each other across a cracked wall. Beneath it in uneven letters, "See me." Michael stopped. At home, Grace was at the table reading. She looked up. "You're pacing," she said. "I might say yes," he replied. She didn't ask what he meant. She knew. "And if you do?" "Then it becomes bigger," he said. "Louder." Grace closed her book. "It already is," she said gently. "You're just deciding whether to guide it." He slept little that night. Not from fear. This time, from clarity forming too slowly to ignore. He accepted. The conference hall was vast, filled with rows of dark suits and polished shoes. Faces that had seen decades of law, order, and precedent. Faces that rarely had to imagine themselves under flashing lights on a quiet street. Michael stood behind the curtain, listening as the final panel wrapped up. Applause echoed. A name was announced. His name. As he stepped into the light, the room rose, not all at once, but enough to feel. Respect. Curiosity. Tension. He stood at the podium and waited for the room to settle. "I want to talk to you," he began, "about the night I stopped being invisible." A ripple moved through the audience. He didn't dramatize it. He didn't accuse. He described. The streetlight. The cold hood of the car. The choice to stay still. The cost of knowing exactly how fragile safety could be. "I've ruled on cases involving bias," he said. "I've written opinions about justice. But nothing prepared me for standing there, knowing my silence was part of my survival." He paused. "Let it breathe. We talk about impartiality as if it lives only in books," he continued. "But it lives in us. In our assumptions. In the split-second decisions we make when no one is watching." The room was silent now. Not polite silence, listening silence. "I am not here to condemn," Michael said. "I am here to remind us that authority without empathy becomes something else entirely." When he finished, he stepped back. Applause came slowly at first, then stronger. Not thunderous. Thoughtful. Afterward, people approached him quietly. A judge who said, "I never considered that angle." A prosecutor who admitted, "I've been afraid to say this out loud." An older man who simply said, "Thank you for staying human." As Michael left the hall, the weight he'd been carrying shifted again, not gone, but shared. If you feel even a flicker of hope reading this, if you believe moments like these can still change hearts, write, "I believe," below. Let hope speak, even if it's soft. Weeks passed. The story faded from headlines, replaced by newer outrage, louder scandals. That was how the world worked. But something remained. At the Legal Aid Center, donations increased. At the police academy, the recruits asked different questions. In Michael's courtroom, he noticed attorneys choosing words more carefully, eyes lingering longer on the people they spoke about, not just the files. One afternoon, a young man waited for him outside chambers. "My mom passed," he said quietly. "But she wanted me to tell you, she watched every forum. She said you made her feel seen." Michael closed his eyes, emotion pressing close to the surface. "I'm honored," he said. That evening, Michael returned home earlier than usual. Grace was in the kitchen, music playing softly. He leaned against the doorway, watching her move with the ease of someone who had weathered storms without losing tenderness. "You look lighter," she said without turning. "I feel aligned," he replied. They ate dinner on the porch, the night warm and forgiving. Fireflies blinked in the yard, brief lights against the dark. Michael thought about the man he had been before the stop. Careful, reserved, certain that dignity meant distance. He understood now that dignity could also mean presence. And as the evening deepened, as quiet settled around them, Michael knew the story was nearing its end, not because the pain had vanished, but because it had been transformed into something that could finally carry warmth forward. One last choice remained. One last thing to say. And he was ready. The letter arrived on an ordinary morning. No seal. No urgency. Just an envelope waiting among grocery flyers and utility bills. Michael almost set it aside. Almost. Inside was a short note, written carefully, the handwriting uneven. Judge Harris. I was the one who made the call that night. Michael sat down. The letter continued, not defensive, not angry. Confessional. I saw someone I didn't recognize getting out of a nice car late at night. I told myself I was being careful. I didn't think about what I was really doing. When I saw the video later, I couldn't sleep. I don't know if you'll forgive me. I just needed you to know I'm sorry. No name. No return address. Michael read it twice. Then a third time. He didn't feel rage. He didn't feel victory. What he felt was something quieter and heavier. Understanding. He folded the letter and placed it beside the child's drawing on his desk. Two pieces of the same night. Two different truths. Both human. Both flawed. That afternoon, Michael took the long way home. He parked by the curb where it had happened and stood there for a while, hands in his coat pockets. Cars passed. People walked dogs. Life went on, unaware of the history embedded in the asphalt. Mrs. Brooks opened her door when she saw him. You all right? She asked. Yes, he said after a moment. I think I am. She nodded, as if she understood more than he'd said. That evening, Michael and Grace sat together in the living room, the windows open to let in the last warmth of the day. He told her about the letter. Do you believe them? Grace asked. I believe they're human, Michael replied. And that might be harder. Grace reached for his hand. What will you do? Michael was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I'll keep telling the truth. And I'll keep leaving the door open. Later that night, he stood alone in his study, lights dim, the house asleep. He thought of the officer learning to see differently. Of the recruit asking better questions. Of the stranger who finally understood the weight of a phone call. He thought of himself, standing still under a streetlight, choosing survival, choosing restraint. If this story has stayed with you, if it stirred something real inside you, don't scroll past quietly. Tap like, not for a video, not for a channel, but for the man who carried fear with grace and still chose empathy. One click can be your way of saying, I saw you. I felt this. The next morning, Michael returned to court. He took his seat on the bench, adjusted his robe, and looked out at the room. Defendants, lawyers, families waiting anxiously for decisions that would shape their lives. He felt the familiar weight settle on his shoulders, but it was different now. Warmer. More grounded. Justice, he realized, was not just about rulings. It was about recognition. When court adjourned, Michael stepped outside into sunlight that felt earned. A young man approached him hesitantly. Sir, he said, my sister watches everything you do. She says you make her feel safer in the world. Michael smiled softly. Tell her thank you. Walking to his car, Michael paused before opening the door. He looked up at the streetlight across the way, ordinary now, harmless. But he knew better. He knew how quickly ordinary moments could become turning points. The world would not change overnight. There would be other calls. Other assumptions. Other nights where fear spoke louder than understanding. But there would also be voices that answered back. People who stepped out of their houses. People who chose to see. People who stayed human when it would have been easier not to. Michael started the engine and drove forward, carrying the story with him, not as a wound, but as a reminder. That dignity doesn't come from silence. That justice isn't cold. And that hope, real hope, often begins the moment someone finally says, I see you.